I came to this house looking for peace. I didn't care about its age or the fact that it was located at the top of a barren hill, isolated from everything else. All I wanted was a place where I could work in peace. I was writing a research book on strange phenomena, and I thought this remote location would help me focus. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and I figured it would be perfect. The plan was simple: move in, do my work, and enjoy the quiet. That was before I realized the house had its own plans. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sky dimming as the wind picked up. The moment I stepped out of the car, I noticed the driveway, a rough patch of dirt leading up to the front door. The house itself was larger than I had expected, with peeling paint and windows patched up with wooden boards. I saw cracks in the foundation and a slanted porch railing. A sense of unease crept over me, but I pushed it aside. It was just an old place, I told myself, in need of repair. When I opened the door, the creaking lock seemed to echo in the silence. Inside, the floors were wooden and uneven, dust floating in the faint light that filtered through the windows. The air smelled stale, like the house had been shut for a long time. There were a few rooms near the entrance. One looked like a living room, and the other a cramped dining room with a small chandelier. I dropped my bags near the stairs, ready to explore and figure out where I would set up my workspace. I set up a small desk in one of the upstairs rooms, choosing the one with a large window facing the hill. The view was mostly dry grass and rocks, but it gave me a sense of solitude. I placed my laptop under the window and planned to begin my writing the next day. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was just the wind outside, but then I realized the sound was coming from the walls. It wasn't threatening, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease from the night before and made coffee in the old kitchen. Despite the appliances being in poor condition, I tried to enjoy the quiet morning. After breakfast, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. I opened closets, peered into dusty corners, and searched for hidden spaces. That's when I discovered the first hidden corridor, tucked behind a large cabinet on the first floor. The gap in the wall led to a narrow, dark passageway that smelled damp and stale. I shone a flashlight into it and saw rough stone walls with faded symbols near the entrance. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. As I ventured further, the whispering returned, but this time it was closer, like someone was right behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing. Still, I continued forward, deeper into the dark hall. The air felt heavy, like I was being watched, but there was no one there. I turned back after a while, feeling an odd pull to continue, even though my instincts screamed for me to leave. Later, I checked the house's blueprint, only to find that it didn't show any hidden corridors or rooms. That's when I realized this house was much more complicated than I had thought. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadow of the table seemed to shift, as if someone was standing behind it. My throat tightened, and my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I stepped back from the table, but my foot slipped on something slick, and I nearly fell. I caught myself on the doorway. The presence was there again, right behind me, its breath soft against my ear. A chill ran down my spine, and my muscles tensed. I spun around, shining the flashlight at the empty space, but there was nothing there. Unable to handle the mounting pressure, my scalp tingled, and I bolted out of the room. I hurried back up the narrow stairs, retreating to the hallway. I closed the hidden panel behind me and pressed my hand to my chest. My heart felt like it might burst through my ribs. I stood there, panting, sweat beading on my forehead. It was clear to me now, the house wasn't just a place to stay. It had an agenda. It wanted me to stay in those corridors, to explore them, to uncover what was hidden in the walls. It was guiding me to something. Over the following nights, the whispers changed. They were no longer random or distant. They had a sad, urgent tone, as if they were pleading for help. Half asleep, I would hear soft voices coming from the walls. Their tone wasn't hostile, but it was desperate. I would catch flickers of movement in the corner of my eye, something shifting past a doorway or a shadow slipping along the floor. Each time, my chest would tighten, and I'd stop breathing for a second, expecting something to jump out at me. But nothing ever did. I tried to focus on my research, but my attention was entirely consumed by the house. I felt drawn to the hidden corridors, even though they filled me with dread. Each day, I discovered new passageways, one behind a loose board in the dining room, another hidden behind old sheets in a closet. The passages connected to a network of rooms and hallways, some filled with leftover junk, others leading to dead ends. There were ladders going up or down to different levels, creating a labyrinth inside the house. The walls were marked with strange symbols, some faint, others freshly etched. I couldn't read them, but they unsettled me. Soon, I realized I was spending more time in the hidden corridors than in the actual rooms of the house. I would wander through them, flashlight in hand, for hours, listening to the whispers. My nerves were frayed, but I couldn't stop myself. I felt an undeniable pull, like I was searching for something important, even though every part of me screamed to leave. My appetite dwindled, and I lost track of the days. My sleep schedule became erratic. I slept during the day and explored the corridors at night when the whispers were loudest. One evening, the house's electricity went out completely. I lit candles and wandered around, checking the circuit breakers in the basement, but nothing worked. I gave up and sat in the living room, listening to the voices in the walls. This time I could hear them clearly, calling my name, softly, like they were inviting me to join them. My hands trembled and my stomach felt hollow. I breathed slowly, trying to calm myself. Part of me wanted to leave, to pack up and drive away, but another part of me felt compelled to stay. It wasn't that the house wanted to harm me. It wanted something more. It wanted a partner, someone who could understand the tunnels, the symbols, the rituals hidden in its walls. It had been coaxing me, drawing me in, piece by piece, until I couldn't walk away. As I continued my exploration, I realized that the house had secrets it wanted me to uncover, but it also wanted silence. I felt like if I spoke about what was happening, the whispers would turn angry, even vengeful. So I kept everything to myself, documenting what I discovered in my notebook. I explored every passage I found, collecting scraps of old papers and symbols that I couldn't decipher. There was a feeling that if I pieced it all together, I would understand why the house chose me. I'm sitting now in one of the hidden rooms, cramped and dark, with only my flashlight and a few candles. The walls are scratched, like someone has been here recently. I hear the quiet murmur of voices on the other side of the wall. My stomach is in knots, and my breath is shallow. My hands shake, but I'm not leaving. I feel as if I'm part of the house now, like it's showing me things I never thought possible. Maybe it's dangerous, but I'm too far gone to turn back. The house doesn't just want a resident, it wants an accomplice to its secrets. And so, I'll keep exploring until I've searched every last corridor. I won't tell anyone else, and I won't speak of it beyond my own notes. The house can sense my compliance, and the whispers seem calmer now, almost grateful. My heart races, but I'm not running away. I don't feel free, and I don't feel safe, but I can't walk out. Every inch of me is on edge, yet I keep going. There's something about this house that has taken hold of me. I hear the whispers even when I close my eyes, and I feel as though somehow this is where I'm meant to be. I felt something was wrong the first night I slept there. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was an odd pressure in my chest the moment I turned off the lights. It wasn't the usual anxiety of moving to a new place. I'd changed apartments before and never felt this kind of tension. This was different. It crawled under my skin, and that's how everything began. I had found the apartment after 2 weeks of relentless. I worked downtown and was tired of the long commute. A friend mentioned a place that was small but reasonably priced. When I checked it out, it seemed fine on the surface. The apartment was on the 4th floor of an older building near my office. The landlord showed me around and mentioned the water stains on the ceiling, shrugging them off as old plumbing. The walls were a bit dingy in some places, but the apartment was furnished and the rent was cheap. The timing worked perfectly, so I signed the papers and moved in a week later. On my first afternoon there, I unpacked my clothes into the tiny closet. The closet door was crooked, like it had been removed from the hinges and never put back properly. The living room area was cramped, with a small sofa that smelled faintly like stale laundry. The wooden floors creaked in certain spots, especially near the kitchenette. I noticed some cracks in the walls, but didn't think much of it. Lots of old buildings have cracks. I just shrugged it off, figuring the place needed some care. That night, I sat on the couch, eating a microwave dinner and flipping through the channels on the small TV. Then I heard muffled footsteps in the corridor. It sounded like boots on the hallway floor, slow and deliberate. I assumed someone was walking by, maybe coming home late. But the steps didn't fade away. They stopped in front of my door, or maybe right next to it. I put my meal aside, stood up, and opened the door, expecting maybe a neighbor needed something. The hallway was empty. All the other doors on my floor were closed and the lights were on, but there was no sign of anyone around. I waited for a few seconds, then stepped out and looked both ways. Still, no one. I convinced myself it was probably someone from downstairs or an echo from the floor above. The building was old, and sound can travel in weird ways. The second night, the same thing happened. Footsteps close by, then silence. I checked again, but no one was. I knocked on the door of the unit next to mine, but nobody answered. The unit across the hall belonged to an older couple, so I tried them next. The man opened the door a crack, peered out, and then opened it fully when he saw I was new. I asked if he'd heard footsteps, but he said no. I mentioned the unit next to mine, and he shook his head. He told me nobody lived there. It had been empty for months. The rent was too high for what the place offered. I thanked him and went back to my apartment. By then I was already uneasy, but I stayed calm. I went through my nightly routine, brushed my teeth, changed into sweats, got into bed, and tried to block everything out. I told myself I was just being paranoid and that I needed time to settle in. On the third night, the footsteps came again, only this time they sounded heavier, like they were right outside my door. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, a trickle of sweat running down my forehead. I held my breath, listening carefully, not daring to move. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a faint scraping sound along the wall behind my headboard. It was like nails dragging across drywall, just a slight scratch. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to get out of bed and check the wall. It felt normal, no vibrations, no odd texture, just an old painted surface. The next morning, I decided to inspect the apartment more thoroughly in the daylight. I moved some furniture away from the walls, especially the area where I'd heard the scratching. That's when I noticed small cracks near the ceiling. They had an unusual shape, almost like footprints. I couldn't make sense of it. They weren't big, just a few inches long, like someone had pressed a foot against the wall from the other side, leaving an outline. The cracks branched out, forming faint shapes. I put my hand on the plaster. It felt solid, but there was a slight roughness around the outlines. A chill ran down my arms. I tried to breathe normally, telling myself that it could just be random cracks and odd patterns. After work, I came home and checked the ceiling again. The damp spots were still there, now more discolored than before. The cracks looked the same. I took a shower, had a light dinner, and tried to distract myself from the strange feeling that lingered in the apartment. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, listening. My heart pounded in my chest, and my eyes darted around the room, expecting to hear something or see some movement. Then, I heard those footsteps again in the hallway. This time, they stopped farther away. After a few seconds, I heard a soft scraping noise in the corner of the living room, near the baseboard. It sounded like something rubbing or pushing against the wall. My chest tightened, and I tiptoed toward the sound. I pressed my ear to the wall, but it stopped when I moved back. I thought I saw something shift in one of the cracks, almost imperceptible, like a twitch. The next day, I bumped into the neighbor across the hall. I asked if she'd heard anything strange at night. She looked at me with sympathy and said no, not really, maybe just some building creaks from the pipes. She suggested I might be hearing the elevator cables or something similar. I thanked her and went to work, but all day I couldn't focus. During breaks, I checked my phone, researching old building issues, water damage, or explanations for unusual sounds. I read about rodents in walls, but that didn't really match what I was experiencing. When I got home, I decided to knock on the door of the vacant apartment next to mine. I figured it would put my mind at ease, confirming that the place really was empty. The door made a hollow sound with each knock, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I pressed my ear to the door, waited, and heard nothing. I felt foolish, like I was chasing ghosts, so I gave up and went inside. That night, the sounds grew loud. The footsteps returned, followed by the scratching in the walls, and then soft tapping noises. It wasn't random tapping. It felt deliberate, like a coded sequence. I jumped at each tap, my pulse racing to the point that I thought I might pass out. I kept turning on lights, pacing from one room to the next. Around 2 a.m., I spotted fresh cracks near the kitchenette. These were shaped differently, like elongated footprints, and they seemed to trail down toward the floor. I crouched down and ran my finger along them. Pieces of plaster crumbled off at my touch, and my skin broke out in goosebumps. I barely slept that night. My body ached with tension, and my eyes burned from exhaustion. Every small creak of the building made me jerk upright in bed. At dawn, I got dressed and left for work earlier than usual, just to clear my head. I stopped by a coffee shop, but my stomach was too tight to finish my coffee. Over the next few days, I developed a routine of inspecting the cracks each morning and evening. I found more shapes, outlines that looked eerily like footprints or handprints pressed into the plaster. Some were near the ceiling, others closer to the floor. They were never larger than a standard adult foot, but their arrangement was bizarre, following no logical pattern. One night, I found a set of them trailing across the wall that separated my bedroom from the vacant unit next door. Another set was near the bathroom door. Each time, I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling or the effects of humidity on the plaster. But then, the movement started. Around midnight, I'd hear a faint shifting sound, like something sliding through the walls. I'd get up, turn on the lights, and stare at the cracks in the dim glow. I swear I saw them expand or contract, as if the shapes were alive. My arms would shake, and I'd feel a rush of adrenaline. I kept telling myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But each morning, I found fresh flakes of paint on the floor, as if the cracks had grown overnight. One evening, I was so freaked out that I decided to call the landlord. I asked him if there were any history of structural problems in the building. He brushed me off, saying that all old buildings had minor cracks. I tried to explain that the cracks looked like footprints, but he cut me off, saying it was probably just the shape of the chipped plaster. When I asked if someone had recently lived next door, he claimed it had been empty for a while. He sounded impatient, like he didn't want to discuss it further. Frustrated, I hung up, feeling dismissed. That same night, I heard a new sound around 3 a.m. It was a series of gentle knocks, almost rhythmic, coming from the wall between my bedroom and the vacant unit. The knocking would pause, then repeat. I tried to calm my breathing, my thoughts running wild. I wondered if a squatter had somehow gotten into the neighboring unit, but I remembered the locked door and how the neighbor had insisted no one lived there. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. I felt sweat trickling down my back. I grabbed a flashlight and walked into the hallway. I aimed the flashlight beam at the cracks. The footprints seemed to shimmer in the light, not literally glowing, but the shadows they cast made them look raised. I reached out and touched one outline, and felt it vibrate under my palm, like a faint tremor. I jerked my hand away, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. I just stood there, breathing quickly, trying to decide whether I should leave the apartment immediately. But I didn't. I told myself it was late, and I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I went back to bed. I lay there awake, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my body rigid with fear. I could hear every small sound, every distant thump. At times, I caught a faint scratching or a muffled shuffle. I wondered what would happen if I poked a hole in the wall or tried to communicate with whatever was inside. The thought made my skin crawl. Days passed, and my routine became a cycle of sleepless nights, frantic mornings, and long hours at work where I struggled to concentrate. My coworkers noticed I was jumpy, but I made up excuses about not sleeping well. When they asked if I was sick, I just shook my head and changed the subject. One Saturday, I decided to stay up all night and watch the walls. I turned off all the lights and lit a single lamp in the living room. I sat in a chair, facing the wall where I'd seen the cracks shift the most. I had a flashlight ready, along with my phone camera. I was determined to catch something, to find proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Around midnight, the familiar footsteps echoed in the hallway. They paused by my door, then moved on. I heard the shuffle of something inside the wall. My body tensed, and I gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. For a while, I only heard the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of cars passing outside. Then came the gentle taps, 3 or 4 at a time, always from the wall. I held my breath and pointed the flashlight. The cracks seemed to be shifting. I blinked hard, unsure if it was just my imagination, but then I saw the plaster flake off in a small spot near the largest footprint. It fell to the floor in a tiny puff of dust. I got up slowly and moved closer. The outline of the footprint seemed to pulse outward, pushing the wall forward by half an inch, then retracting. It was like something was pressing from inside. A wave of dizziness hit me, but I stayed, watching. The tapping continued in small bursts, like some kind of code. Each knock vibrated through the plaster. I was too scared to touch it this time. I just stood there, heart pounding, sweat dripping down my temples. After a few minutes, it stopped. The footprint sank back into place, and the cracks went still. I backed away, not blinking, afraid any quick movement would trigger it again. I managed to grab my phone and switch to the camera, but by the time I aimed it, everything looked normal. The cracks appeared harmless, just random lines in old paint. The next morning, I considered moving out. My chest felt like it had a constant knot in it, and my appetite was gone. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the way the wall had pushed out, as if a foot or hand was trying to poke through. I walked around the apartment looking for more clues. I found more flakes of paint on the floor, by the windows, near the corners, and by the bathroom door. Small cracks were everywhere now, not just in one spot. They formed patterns that resembled footprints, sometimes overlapping, sometimes scattered. I ended up calling a friend, the same one who had told me about the apartment. I asked if he could come over and check something out. He sounded busy and said he might come by next week. I didn't press him for details. I wasn't sure how to explain any of this without sounding crazy. I just told him it was urgent, and he promised to make time soon. In the following nights, the presence in the walls became more active. Soft scratches, occasional taps, and those echoing steps in the hallway outside. I noticed that the entity, or whatever it was, didn't seem to threaten me directly. It never tried to harm me or break through the wall in a violent way. It felt more like it was watching, waiting. I'd sense it when I was half asleep, that feeling of eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything. My body would go rigid, and I'd hear that faint knock or scratch, as if to remind me it was still there. I started sleeping with the lights on in the living room, leaving my bedroom door open so I could see down the hall. That gave me a small measure of comfort. I placed my phone next to me in bed, ready to call someone if the knocking got too intense. But each night ended the same way. Me lying awake for hours, heart pounding, until exhaustion took over and I passed out for a few hours. One night at dawn, I caught myself talking out loud to the walls. I whispered that I wasn't a threat, that I just wanted peace. I felt silly, but it calmed me for a moment. I guess I was trying to keep whatever was there from getting more aggressive. Nothing answered. Just silence. Then a single gentle knock on the wall next to my bed. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed still, not saying another word. The knock didn't repeat. I keep telling myself I should leave, but I'm not sure if running away will solve anything. Part of me wants to know what it is, why it's here, and what it wants. Another part of me is terrified it might follow me. These last few days I haven't heard as many footsteps in the hallway, but the cracks have multiplied. Sometimes I see them twitch, sometimes flakes fall. The entity hasn't tried to come through fully yet, but I feel its presence more strongly every night. I'm on edge 24/7 now, my phone in my hand all the time, ready to dial for help if things escalate. But I haven't dialed yet. I'm not sure how to. If I tried to explain this to anyone, they'd probably think I'm out of my mind, or maybe that I've been on something. I still can't fully believe it myself, yet here I am, living with it. As I tell you this story, I'm sitting on my couch, staring at the walls. The lights are on, and it's past midnight. My heart is pounding, and the skin on my neck is prickling. I can hear soft taps again, faint but unmistakable, reminding me that something is watching me from within the walls. I have no idea how this will end, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not alone in this house. There's something in the walls, leaving footprints in the plaster, and it's always just beyond my reach. It doesn't speak, but it makes itself known through scratches and knocks, hidden behind the old plaster, waiting, watching. I remember the first night it happened. I was lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind wandering through 1,000 worries. The house was silent, except for the faint breeze outside. Then, I heard it. A low whisper at first, like a deep murmur coming from somewhere near the back of my property. I sat up, feeling a chill on my arms, and realized it was coming from the direction of the old well. I live on a small, rural property that I inherited from my uncle years ago. It's got a few acres of pasture, some trees, and a barn that leans to one side. There's also an ancient well, not far from the house, covered with a thick stone lid. The lid has faded markings on it, almost rubbed away by time. I've always thought of it as a piece of farm history, never giving it much thought. I've never tried to open it because the stone cover looks heavy and unstable. I always figured that if it fell, it would be a mess. That night, I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand. My heart was racing, unsure whether I was dreaming or if the voice was real. It repeated a phrase, but I couldn't make out the words, broken, like an old language or dialect. I forced myself out of bed, put on my boots, and headed out the back door. I didn't turn on the porch light, just used the flashlight and walked slowly across the yard. The air felt colder than usual, the wind prickling my skin. I could hear leaves rustling by the fence, but my dogs, usually so vocal, were silent inside the barn. That felt strange. I moved the flashlight in a wide arc in front of me, scanning for movement. The voice came again, louder this time, deep, like it was coming from somewhere underground. When I reached the well, I noticed the stone lid was slightly shifted, out of place by an inch or two. The gap was enough for me to see a thin blackness inside. A cold draft seeped through the crack. I aimed my flashlight at the gap, but all I could see was darkness. As soon as the light hit the well, the voice stopped. My pulse raced, my hands trembled. I tried to push the stone back into place, but it wouldn't budge. It was heavier than I'd expected. The ancient symbols on the lid seemed sharper now, more defined, almost as if they were clearer than before. I remembered seeing them worn out, but under the flashlight, they looked newly defined. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my head. I decided to leave it alone for now and went back inside. I locked the door and checked the windows, but I hardly slept that night. The morning sunlight made everything seem normal, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I went back to the well during the day, and the cover looked the same as always, round, scratched, and scuffed. The gap was smaller, so I pressed the lid again, but it stayed in place. I convinced myself it was just the wind making strange noises through the crack. But that voice still echoed in my mind. It didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like words. Later that evening, I found it hard to concentrate on anything. I kept thinking about the well, feeling a tightness in my chest as I waited for nightfall. Around midnight, I heard it again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside. My boots crunched the gravel as I moved quickly. The voice was clearer now, repeating the same phrase, but still unintelligible. I leaned closer to the crack in the stone, and there was a damp, earthy smell. Without thinking, I whispered, "Hello." As soon as I spoke, the voice paused, then rumbled back with something that almost sounded like a name. It wasn't mine, but the sound of it stirred something deep inside me, like I'd heard it before, though I couldn't remember where or when. I ran my hand along the edge of the lid. It felt cold and rough. I tried to push the lid again, and it barely moved. I felt a faint vibration beneath my palms, like something was shifting in the ground. My gut twisted. I pulled my hands away and stepped back, the voice starting again, this time vibrating through my chest. I backed away slowly, then returned to the house. My hands shook on the doorknob. In bed, I couldn't. My mind kept replaying that name, even though I couldn't fully grasp it. It felt like it was tied to me. I got up several times during the night to check the window, but the yard looked empty. By dawn, I made myself some coffee and decided to call my friend Carl. He's a handyman who's worked with old structures. I asked him about wells and stone lids, whether they could shift if the ground settled. He said it was common, and he offered to come by and help reseal it. We scheduled a day later that week, but he couldn't come right away because he had another job. I told him it was fine, though I tried not to let on how anxious I was. Each night, the voice came back, and the phrase became a little clearer. I started recognizing certain sounds, and that name appeared again and again. I didn't fully understand it, but I could recognize it, and each time I heard it, it triggered a dull ache behind my eyes. My muscles felt tight, my shoulders were sore, and I lost my appetite. I felt exhausted most of the day. On the fourth night, something changed. I was sitting in the living room, dozing off around 2 in the morning when I heard it. My name, spoken in that same deep tone. It wasn't the strange name anymore. It was my actual name, said slowly as if the voice was testing how it sounded. My heart jumped. I shot up from the couch and almost dropped my flashlight. Trembling, I went outside. The night was still, and the area near the well was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind clouds. My flashlight beam shook as I walked toward the well, and when I got close, I saw that the stone lid had shifted even more than before. The gap was wider, maybe half a foot, and inside, it was pitch black. I heard the sound of water dripping, then that low voice said my name again. My mouth felt dry, my throat tight. I stepped closer and aimed the flashlight into the gap, but I could see nothing except the damp inner wall of the well. The stones were covered with a layer of green algae, and something moved in the darkness, but my flashlight didn't reach far enough to make it out. A cold wind blew up from the well, making my skin crawl. I wanted to run back to the house, but something seemed to draw me closer. I forced myself to stop at the edge. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice weak. I felt ridiculous, like I was talking to a hole in the ground. There was a long pause, and then the voice spoke again. It said a series of words I didn't recognize, guttural, sharp sounds. I heard my name at the end of the sentence. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I smelled a faint odor, something damp and rotting, like vegetation left too long in water. I backed up, bumping into a pile of old timber near the well, causing it to topple over with a loud crash. In the silence that followed, the voice stopped. I walked backward, making my way to the house. My hands were sweaty, and my shirt was stuck to my back. I locked every door, sat on the floor by the window, clutching the flashlight, and stared out into the... I listened for more sounds, but there were none. I felt alone, but uneasy. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy. I mowed part of the yard, even though it was muddy from recent rain, and repaired a broken gate hinge. I avoided the well during the day, though I felt an odd pull to check if the lid had shifted more. Each time I let my mind wander, I pictured the gap growing wider. That night, I heard the voice again, stronger this time. It repeated that strange name, then said my name, like it was commanding me. My chest tightened whenever I heard it. My breathing grew shallow, and sometimes my vision blurred for a second. It was hard to think clearly. On the 6th night, I went out there with a crowbar and a hammer. I wanted to shift the lid back into place. I thought if I sealed it completely, the voice would stop. I wore gloves and a headlamp so I could keep my hands free. As soon as I got close, I heard water splashing in the well. Not just dripping, something was moving. My stomach churned. I slid the crowbar under the edge of the stone and tried to lift it. The stone barely moved, so I put all my weight into it, grunting and straining. It rose about an inch, then slipped back with a heavy thud. A rush of cold air poured out from the gap like a blast from a freezer. My headlamp flickered, and I heard the voice chanting something. My ears started ringing, and I lost my grip on the crowbar. My heart felt like it was in my throat. I picked up my tools and stepped back. I saw a faint glow in the gap, but it could have been a reflection from my headlamp. I couldn't tell. Dizzy and disoriented, I fell to one knee, breathing hard. The chanting continued, repeating the same sequence of words. Some of them sounded like my name, others like that other name. My arms tingled and goosebumps spread across my body. I forced myself to stand, grabbed the hammer, and swung it down on the stone lid, hoping to scare whatever was in there. The metal clanged against the stone, sending vibrations through my arms, but it didn't crack or shift. The chanting stopped for a moment, then resumed, this time in a deeper tone. I left the crowbar there and ran back to the house. My muscles ached, and my lungs burned from the cold air and the panic inside me. I locked everything and turned on every light. I couldn't stop shaking. My thoughts were scattered. I stayed up until sunrise, pacing around, trying to come up with a plan. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my old well was whispering? That I was hearing voices from underground? They'd think I was nuts. I texted Carl again. He said he'd come the next day, late afternoon. That day felt endless. I stayed away from the yard, tried to watch TV, played some music, but every sound made me jump. I felt this constant pressure in my ears, like the air was heavier. Carl finally arrived around 5 in the evening. I felt some relief seeing his truck. He's a sturdy guy, about my age, with a calm way of speaking. I took him to the well and showed him the lid. I didn't mention the voices. I just said the lid was loose and letting cold air out. He checked the stone, looked at the edges, and said it might weigh a couple 100 pounds. He thought we'd need a few tools or a small jack to shift it properly. As the sun started to set, I grew more anxious. I first realized something was wrong when I saw my reflection blink at the wrong time. It was a strange moment, one that jolted me out of my usual routine. I'd always glanced at my reflection, whether in mirrors, windows, or any shiny surface, but I'd never really paid much attention. It was just a habit, a quick check to adjust my posture or make sure I didn't have something in my teeth. But then, one night, as I walked down the corridor of my house, I passed the large mirror on the wall. That's when I noticed it. My reflection blinked a fraction of a second after My eyes were open, but my reflection's eyes stayed closed. It made me stumble forward, gripping the edge of a small table to steady myself. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but it kept happening. I started noticing more unsettling details than just the delayed blink. I live in a small house, a one-story with 3 bedrooms. The corridor leading to the bedrooms has a large mirror on the left wall. During the day, sunlight pours in through the windows, lighting up the space. But at night, the hallway feels tight and a little eerie, especially with the dim, warm light casting shadows everywhere. I used to walk by that mirror without a second thought. Maybe I'd glance at it to adjust my hair, but after that first incident, I started paying more attention. One night, around midnight, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. On my way back, I stopped in front of the mirror, determined to see if it would happen again. Sure enough, my reflection blinked with a slight delay. It wasn't much, but enough to make my heart race. I leaned in, trying to figure out what was going on. Everything looked the same. My nose, my lips, my hair, but the blink was off. I couldn't explain it. I decided to test it. I raised my right arm, and my reflection raised its left arm. Nothing unusual there. I moved my head, wiggled my fingers, and every time, the reflection matched my movements perfectly. But when I blinked, there was always that lag. It was unnerving. I pressed my fingertips against the mirror, feeling the solid surface beneath my touch. I ran my hand along the frame, looking for cracks, but everything seemed fine. That night, I tried to shake it off and went to bed, but the next few days, I couldn't stop watching for the strange lag in my reflections. I caught myself checking mirrors around the house, windows, the glass door, even the toaster. Most of the time, my reflection matched me, but sometimes I saw that slight delay. The strangest thing was that sometimes my reflection would tilt its head after I did, or my reflection's lips would part when mine were closed. These moments were brief, quick enough to brush off, but they made me uneasy. I tried to relax by watching TV in the living room, leaving most of the lights off except for a floor lamp next to the couch. Around 2 a.m., I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark window. My reflection stood still, its eyes fixed on me, almost like I was being watched by someone else. I leaned forward, noticing that my reflection's head was tilted slightly to the left, even though my own head felt straight. I shifted on the couch and craned my neck to match its position. Then I blinked. My reflection's eyelids dropped a moment too late. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my mouth went dry. I gripped the couch cushion, feeling nauseous as though I was seeing something I shouldn't have. I quickly got up and went to my bedroom, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. But every time I closed my eyes, I couldn't stop imagining my reflection moving without me. I stayed awake for hours, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner, trying not to think about what I had seen. The tension only worsened in the following week. I started working from home more, hoping to distract myself. But the more time I spent at home, the more I saw those strange delays. One day, I decided to test it. I set up my phone's camera in front of the bathroom mirror to see if I was just imagining things. I hit record and stood in front of the mirror, moving my arms in a sequence and blinking several times to check for any delay. I then transferred the video to my computer, watching it over and over. In the recording, everything looked normal. No delay, no odd movements. My blinking matched my reflection perfectly. It drove me crazy. I knew what I had seen with my own eyes, yet it wasn't there on the video. I began to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. A few days later, something even stranger happened. Around 11 p.m., I had just finished brushing my teeth when I heard a low, raspy whisper. It almost sounded like an exhale, but I distinctly caught my name in it, Daniel. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up as I scanned the empty corridor. The house was silent, except for the faint buzz of the bathroom light. My heart raced and I turned to face the mirror. I didn't say anything, but I felt an overwhelming urge to speak, to fill the silence. My throat was dry, and I could taste my own fear. I stared at my reflection, which stared back at me. I blinked a few times, but no delay this time. Just when I thought the moment was over, I heard the voice again. It was quiet, but it whispered my name as though it was coming from behind the glass. I quickly backed away, my eyes still locked on the mirror, and rushed to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just stress. Maybe I needed some rest or a vacation, but the strange events kept escalating. That afternoon, I walked past a window in the living room and caught my reflection in the glass. I was just checking to see if I looked too tired, but then my reflection smiled at me. I wasn't smiling at all. My lips were pressed together, but my reflection was grinning, showing teeth. I staggered backward, almost tripping over the coffee table. The grin lingered for a second before vanishing, replaced by my neutral expression. I felt heat rush to my face, and a tingling sensation crept down my neck. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I considered calling someone, a friend, a doctor, but what could I say? My reflection is out of sync and smiling when I'm not. Over the next few days, these moments became more frequent. Sometimes I'd be washing dishes in the kitchen, only to see my reflection in the window, watching me with its head tilted. Other times, I'd be in the bathroom washing my hands, and my reflection would delay its movements, almost like it was operating on its own timeline. Each time, I felt a tightness in my chest and a lump in my throat. The tension built in my shoulders and my stomach churned. I started covering mirrors. I hung a towel over the mirror in the corridor, kept the bathroom light off when I didn't need it, and avoided looking at windows or any reflective surfaces. For a while, it helped. If I couldn't see my reflection, it couldn't mess with my head. But in a strange way, I still felt its presence. It was like something was waiting for me, just behind the cloth. I'd walk past the covered mirror and feel a prickle on my skin, as though someone was staring at me from behind it. My heart would pound, and I'd start sweating. One night, I had enough. I was tired of being afraid. It was around 1 a.m. when I decided to confront the mirror. I took the towel down and stood in front of it, under the hallway light. I looked myself in the eye, waiting for something weird to happen. For about a minute, nothing did. My reflection stared back at me, motionless, matching me perfectly. The house was quiet, my heart thumping in my chest. My palms were clammy, and I was breathing faster than usual. Just when I was about to turn away, I heard that familiar whisper again. This time, right behind the glass. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell it was my name. A chill ran down my arms, and my reflection's lips twitched into a smirk. I wasn't smiling. My lips were tight, my jaw clenched, but there it was. I stared at the mirror in shock, my reflection smirking at me. Then, to my horror, it winked. Both of my eyes were wide open, and the difference between us was immediate, like looking at two completely different people. I stepped back, and my reflection seemed to follow my movements in real time, but it kept that unsettling smirk. My mouth went dry, and my legs felt like jelly. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice shaky. The reflection didn't speak, but I saw its lips move. No sound came from its mouth. I looked down at my trembling hands, feeling my heart hammering in my chest, and the back of my neck was slick with sweat. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to keep staring at it, demanding again, "Who are you?" This time, the reflection mouthed something else, and I heard a low hiss through the glass. It was just a brief breath, but it made my skin crawl. The next instant, the reflection's expression snapped back to neutral, as if nothing had happened. I scrambled backward, my legs weak, and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for air. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, making it hard to steady myself. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, trying to regain my Eventually, I locked the door and shut the curtains. I didn't want to see my reflection anywhere. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of my bed, listening for any strange sounds, but it was silent, eerily so. Still, there was a heavy presence in the house, like I wasn't alone. The next morning, I packed a bag and left, heading to a friend's place across town. I tried to avoid mirrors and reflective surfaces as much as possible, but even at my friend's apartment, I couldn't escape it. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror, blinking or moving normally, and for a fleeting moment, I'd think I was safe. But then I'd notice that tiny delay, like a glitch, and my stomach would twist in fear. It was never gone, that feeling that it was still there, waiting. The worst part was the voice. It started coming to me in quiet moments, even when I wasn't near a mirror. A low, rough whisper calling my name, making my chest tighten with dread. A chill would creep over my arms, and sometimes I'd jump, thinking someone was behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there. I don't know what it wants, or why it's fixated on me. I don't know if it's a trick of my mind, or if something else is lurking on the other side of the glass, taking my shape. All I know is that when I see the delayed blink, or that twisted grin, my heart races and my skin turns cold. The shaking in my hands is uncontrollable. I haven't gone back to my house in days. My friend thinks it's just stress, that I need therapy or more sleep. But I haven't told him everything. I'm afraid he'll think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but the reflection, the voice, the smirk, it all felt too real. I can't ignore it anymore. Now, every time I see a reflection, I brace myself. I check to make sure it matches my movements, or if it's half a second behind with some different expression. I hate feeling this jumpy, but I don't know what else to do. Sometimes at night, I think about the mirror in my core. I wonder if something is still waiting for me to come back, standing there in the reflective surface, smiling at an empty hallway. I can almost hear the rough whisper of my name echoing through the silence, and it makes my heart race all over again. When I stepped off the train, I felt a sharp jolt in my chest. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the station was nearly empty. My legs were sore from the trip, and the air felt heavy against my skin. I glanced around, expecting someone to pick me up, but there was no one. Unease washed over me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Then I noticed something strange, a dark shape on the ground near me. I stopped and looked up, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. My breathing grew shallow as I stared at my own shadow. It was exactly where it should have been, slanting to my right. But then I saw another shadow, just a few feet away. It had no owner. There was no one visible to match it. I shifted my position, and the shadow seemed to shift too, though not quite in sync with me. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but the more I moved, the more it seemed to respond to me. The unease in my stomach grew, and I forced myself to walk toward the exit, dragging my suitcase behind me. As I glanced down again, the second shadow slid across the concrete, a few steps behind me. There were no other passengers on the platform, so it definitely wasn't someone else's shadow. I tried to shake off the feeling, thinking it was just my exhausted eyes playing tricks. I picked up my pace, my shirt sticking to my back, my mouth dry. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. When I did, the shadow was still there. It wasn't shaped like a human, it was lopsided, the edges unclear. By the time I got outside, the air had cooled, but I was still sweating. I hopped into my car, trying to push the panic down. But as I pulled out of the lot, I saw something dark flicker near the car. My heart skipped, and I pressed the accelerator, desperate to leave the station behind. At home, I tried to forget about it. I grabbed some takeout, turned on the TV, and slumped onto the couch. My head throbbed, and my eyes stung. I told myself I just needed rest. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that second shadow again, trailing me. I woke up in a cold sweat several times, checking my surroundings. The room was dimly lit by the streetlight outside. Nothing seemed amiss. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep, hoping the weirdness would end by morning. It didn't. The next day, when I went outside to throw out the garbage, I saw it again. That same shadow, offset from my own, trailing just behind me. I froze, holding the trash bag. My heart pounded as I searched for anything overhead that could create a second silhouette. There was nothing. No tree branches, no wires, no objects. Just the shadow, clear as day on the ground. My heartbeat quickened as I backed up against the wall, desperately trying to stand in the shade, hoping the shadow would vanish. But it followed me, creeping along the ground, moving with me as the sunlight cast its glow. I held my breath for a moment before dumping the trash and hurrying back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The rest of the day was spent avoiding the floor, afraid to look down. Each step felt like something was right behind me, mimicking my every movement. The sensation prickled at the back of my neck, making my skin crawl. In the afternoon, I convinced myself I was imagining things. If I went out into the public, maybe I'd see that it was just the shadows from streetlights or something harmless. I walked down my street, the sun high above. My own shadow stretched out in front of me, but there, just beside it, was the darker patch of shadow. It wasn't part of me. It was crooked, following my every move on the sidewalk. I kept walking, my mouth dry and my hands clammy. I glanced around, contact with anyone. I didn't want to seem crazy by asking if anyone else saw it. Cars passed by, but no one seemed to notice anything strange. I kept walking, glancing nervously over my shoulder. Over the next few days, it changed. The shadow became more distorted, bending at the edges, shifting shape. I would catch glimpses of it crouching low, the figure's top shifting into a hunch, almost as if it was trying to stay close to the ground. It never showed arms or legs in any clear detail, just a blob, but it felt like it was trying to take form. I tried staying inside, keeping the lights off as much as possible. But no matter where I went, when even the faintest light touched the room, I could see it in the corner of my eye. Every time my heart would pound, and I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder. Sometimes the shadow would be a few feet away. Other times it would be right beside me, mimicking my every movement. I couldn't sleep. I paced around my house, checking each room. Nothing seemed out of place, but every time I moved, I could feel it behind me. The dark outline shifting across the floor. One night, I stood still in a corner, hoping it would stop. Even with most lights off, a faint glow from outside showed my outline on the wall. And there it was again, always moving in a delayed or awkward way. When I raised my arm, it would follow half a second later, not in the same angle. It made my scalp tingle with dread. I was afraid to sleep, unable to predict what might happen if I stopped paying attention. Eventually, I decided to go back to work, hoping the normal routine would ground me. I got up early, took a shower, and avoided looking at my reflection. I hurried out the door, got in my car, and the drive felt strange. I glanced at the empty passenger seat, feeling like something was there, lurking just outside in the sunlight. My palms were sweaty, and I kept wiping them on my pants. At the office, I kept busy with spreadsheets, avoiding the windows. My coworker Mike came by a few times, noticing I looked tense. I shrugged it off, saying I was just tired. While he was standing there, I looked down at the floor behind him. His shadow and mine were there, but no extra shape. I felt a brief moment of relief. But as soon as he left, I went to the break room. The corridor was brightly lit, and I saw it again, the shadow sliding along behind me, hugging the base of the wall. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the present moment. I listened to the hum of the air conditioning, felt the heat of the coffee cup in my hand. But no matter what I did, The shadow was there, edging closer. I could feel its presence, pressing itself against my chair, almost as if it wanted to merge with my own shadow. That night, after work, I drove home in a daze. I parked in my driveway and immediately looked down. The street lamp was on, casting a clear shadow, but the second one was still there, crouching, lower than ever. My knees felt weak, and I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. Inside, I turned on the overhead light, shadow on the carpet. But there, near the wall, was that other shadow, smaller, twitching at the edges. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to take drastic action. I turned off all the lights, grabbed a flashlight, and went down to the basement. It was a cold, unpleasant space, with concrete walls and a bare floor. Maybe if I stayed in the dark, it would disappear. I switched off the flashlight and sat in the pitch black, hearing only the hum of the furnace and the cold against my legs. My heart pounded in my ears. After a few minutes, I switched the flashlight back on and pointed it at the floor. My shadow was there, but so was that other thing. It had expanded, filling part of the empty space. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled up the stairs, my legs shaking, slamming the basement door shut behind me. But I knew that a door wouldn't stop something with no real form. The tension only kept building after that. I tried everything I could think of to get rid of it, avoiding bright lights, standing in corners, hiding behind furniture. But no matter what I did, the shadow never vanished. It just shifted, twisted, or changed. Every time I looked down, there it was, following, waiting. I could feel the weight of it again, this creeping presence. Every time I took a step, my heart would race, pounding so loudly in my chest it almost drowned out everything else. I backed up against the wall, trying to shield myself from the sight of it, hoping it would just disappear. It moved with me, lurking in the corner of my eye, its outline dark and shifting along the ground. For a moment, I held my breath, hoping to rid myself of it. The more I tried to escape its presence, the more it followed. Even when I dashed inside and locked the door, it stayed with me, always there, always watching. I thought maybe the sunlight could drive it away, so I opened the curtains and stood in the middle of the room, staring at my shadow on the floor. But even then, there was that extra shape, darker and sharper than mine. I spoke aloud to it, trying to command it to leave, but it only twitched in response, rippling like it was alive. A deep chill washed over me. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to change, distorting, crouching lower and lower as if trying to stay hidden from the light. It never had a clear form, no arms, no legs, just an endless blob that seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways. The thought of it merging with me was terrifying. I couldn't get rid of it, no matter what I did. Even in the dark, I could still feel its presence, and the more I focused on it, the more I realized it was something otherworldly, not just a flicker of light or a trick of the mind. I tried to make it go away by leaving. I went back to the station, stood by the platform where I first noticed it, hoping that maybe it would stay there, but it followed me again. When the train passed, the shadow jerked forward, matching my every move. I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried, the more it seemed to stretch and grow, never letting me forget it was right there, waiting. That night, I sat alone, trying to watch TV, but the flickering light only brought me back to the same dark spot on the floor, where my shadow and the other one still loitered. I felt like I was constantly being watched. No matter how many lights I turned on or where I went, it always came back. I don't know how it will end. All I know is that it's here, and it won't leave. I can't let my guard down for even a second. Every time I move, it moves with me, like a reflection of myself that I can't control. The feeling of it trying to merge with my own shadow makes my skin crawl. It's always watching, always waiting, and no matter what I do, I can't escape it. To keep myself calm, I moved away from the mirror and walked over to an old I flipped the latch and opened the lid, sending dust into the air, causing me to cough. Inside, there were old black and white photographs, some showing people in formal clothing, but none of them were familiar. I found a few postcards, a stack of letters tied with twine, and some thick books that appeared to be journals. I picked up one of the books and flipped through it. The handwriting was neat, but the language seemed like an older form of Portuguese. I couldn't make out much, just a few scattered words. The chanting noise, however, continued to draw my attention back to the mirror. Frustrated, I slammed the trunk shut and turned around. The mirror's surface reflected a corner of the attic, swallowed in shadow. My flashlight seemed dimmer than before, even though I had just replaced the batteries the week prior. Sweat slicked my palms, so I wiped them on my jeans. I cautiously approached the mirror again, stepping around a broken chair. The chair scraped against the floor, and the chanting abruptly paused. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. Then, the chanting began again, louder this time, as if it were responding to my movement. My legs trembled, but I kept walking toward the mirror, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn and run. When I got closer, I crouched down and focused the flashlight on the symbols along the frame. They were more detailed than I had initially realized. Some resembled small animals or faces with hollow eyes, while others were spirals or intersecting lines. The wood was chipped and dull, and as I reached out to touch one of the carvings, a sudden chill ran through my fingers, making me pull my hand back quickly. My chest tightened as I tried to breathe steadily. I stood up and looked into the dusty glass. My reflection stared back at me, mouth drawn tight, dark circles under my eyes. The chanting filled my ears, almost like it was in my head. I had the urge to smash the mirror or run downstairs, but my feet felt glued to the floor. My pulse raced in my throat, and after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to step back. I switched off the flashlight, hoping the darkness would help me pinpoint where the chanting was coming from. That was a mistake. The entire attic went pitch black, and the chanting intensified, echoing in my ears. My mind conjured the image of someone standing right behind me. I spun around, flicking the flashlight back on, scanning every corner of the attic, but there was no one there. Panic surged through me. My breath came in short bursts and a shiver ran down my spine. I convinced myself I needed to leave, at least for the night. I didn't feel safe. That thought was clearer than any other in that moment. I hurried back to the door, praying it wouldn't jam. The floor creaked beneath me with every step. When I reached the door, I nudged it open and it groaned, sounding almost like an animal in pain. I rushed downstairs, shut the attic door behind me, and leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. My shirt was soaked with sweat. The hallway felt normal, quiet, like any other day. I tried to calm myself, taking slow breaths. The chanting was gone, and my heart rate gradually returned to normal, but my mind was buzzing. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror and the symbols. For the next few days, I avoided the attic. I went about my usual routine: work, meals, sleep. But the image of that dusty old attic and the chant that echoed in my ears lingered. I had dreams about opening the trunk and finding more old journals. Sometimes, I dreamed of hearing whispers calling my name. I woke up with a start more than once, sheets damp and twisted around me. Eventually, my curiosity became too strong to ignore. I grabbed my flashlight, along with a fresh set of batteries, and headed back upstairs. The attic door creaked just like it had before, and the air felt stale. Dust motes danced in the weak light. At first, I didn't hear the chanting, but it wasn't long before I did. It started low, muffled, almost like it was coming from another room. I held my breath and listened, but the sound seemed to be getting louder. I walked over to a different trunk, hoping to distract myself, and opened it. Inside, I found more letters and some old family documents with official seals. They were brittle, yellowed with age. I set them aside and pulled out a small wooden box. It smelled faintly of mold. When I opened it, I found a set of old keys, each with a different shape. The metal was discolored, and my hand shook a little as I picked them up. Then the chanting began again, very low at first. I stood up, leaving the trunk open, and slowly walked in a circle around the attic. The sound guided me toward the mirror. I hated how my stomach dropped when I realized where I was heading. The reflection in the mirror showed the beam of my flashlight in the corner behind me, but nothing else. My throat tightened as I tried to swallow. The chanting grew louder, and an odd pressure filled my ear. I lifted my hand to my ear, trying to clear the sensation, and then I noticed that the mirror looked clearer than before. It was as if someone had wiped off the dust. My reflection was sharp, and for a moment I stared at myself, unable to look away. I wanted to break that mirror, but fear held me back. I tried to avert my eyes, but then I thought I saw movement in the reflection. a shifting shadow behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight everywhere, but there was nothing. When I turned back to the mirror, the chanting stopped for a brief moment. The silence made me realize how tense my muscles were, how weak my knees had become. A slight tremble ran through my hands. I thought about calling a friend, but I didn't want to explain. How could I? I felt embarrassed, but at the same time, I was terrified. I stepped away from the mirror, keeping my eyes fixed on it until I reached the attic door. The chanting stayed at a low volume, always in the background. I reached for the doorknob, and as I did, the chanting rose in pitch. My chest tightened, and in a panic, I yanked the door open and rushed out, flicking off the flashlight. I slammed the attic door shut behind me, and that horrible groaning sound echoed in the hallway. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts kept swirling, and my muscles ached from the tension. The chant echoed in my head, a constant buzz that wouldn't go away. The next morning, I drank coffee and stared at the attic door from the living room, wondering what to do. I considered telling someone in my family, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I tell them about the chanting or the strange mirror? I'd sound insane, even to myself. I decided to stay away from the attic for a while. The chanting seemed connected to that mirror, and I couldn't bear to be around it. My nerves were on edge, and I felt drained. For several days, I didn't hear anything strange, and I kept my distance from the attic. But every time I passed the door, I couldn't help but glance up the stairs. The door looked harmless enough, just an old wooden door with a tarnished knob. I don't have any neat conclusion to offer. I never found a logical explanation for the chanting or the strange symbols carved into the mirror's frame. Even now, when I walk through the hallway at night, I feel a cold spot near the attic door. Sometimes my hair stands on end for no apparent reason. I try to ignore it, but I stay away from the attic, even though I know the trunks are still up there and the mirror is still leaning against the wall, waiting for someone to open the door again. I don't plan on going back up there. The chanting hasn't stopped in my mind, even if I can't always hear it. I tell myself I've come to terms with the unanswered questions, but it's hard when the house is quiet at night. I think I hear the faint hum of voices chanting somewhere far off, and I grip my blankets tight, closing my eyes, hoping to... I try to remind myself that the attic is just a room full of dusty junk. But every time I think of that carved mirror and the eerie sound, my heart races. I don't know what's behind that glass, and I'm not sure I want to find out.